Okay, so at the bottom of your formula sheet, I don't think my other computer. You have y equals a sine b x minus c plus d. And then you have the same version with just a cos. Okay? Tomorrow we're doing transformations on these. Vertical stretch, horizontal phase shift is what it's called in trig because they want to ruin it, and vertical displacement instead of vertical translation, and it only happens in trig, and I don't know why. Sorry, it is what it is. They changed it to phase shift and displacement only for trig instead of translation. So, what do we know about this? This little a here, we're not doing transformations today, we're just dealing with amplitude, period, all that stuff. So, what does that a do? Well, we do know it is a vertical stretch. Vertical stretches stretch our y's, do they not? So our amplitude of our basic sine and cos graph we said was 1. It was 1 up. Well, it was 2 up, and then we split it in half, right? So it was 1 up and 1 up. We agree? So if I vertically stretch it, it's going to make my amplitude bigger or smaller by that much, correct? So this a value, actually the absolute value of the a is my amplitude. So off of a graph, I'd have to count from minimum to maximum and divide by 2. But off of an equation, it's just the absolute value. And the reason why it's the absolute value of a is, once again, amplitude is always positive because it's a distance. Okay? So that will give me my amplitude. The period of the graph yesterday, how long did it take for a sine and a cos graph to repeat themselves? 2 pi or 360, right? 360 is 2 pi. And we know that because the unit circle repeats itself, which is what we just got all those points off of for the sine graph. We got them all off the unit circle, didn't we? And the unit circle repeats itself every 360 or 2 pi. It just keeps repeating, correct? So what would cause the graph to be wider, making the period longer for it to repeat itself, or narrower, making the graph repeat itself faster? What would cause the graph to stretch this way or this way? And if you're not here, you can't see my hands, and that sucks to be you. This way or this way. Horizontal stretch. The horizontal stretch is going to make it wider if the horizontal stretch is big, or narrower if the horizontal stretch is small. We agree? So we know that the original graph had a 1 here, correct? It was just sine 1x. We agree? So if we want the period off of a graph, or off an equation, sorry, we do 2 pi divided by b, or 360 degrees divided by b, and you pick which one that the equation is in. So if the equation or the graph has the x-axis in degrees, then you'd pick 360. If the x-axis or the equation is in radians, which you can tell from your c value, then you would put it in radian measure, 2 pi. So let's think about this. If I had just y equals sine 1x, which is what we had yesterday, you just don't see the 1, correct? We would do p equals 2 pi divided by 1, and it was 2 pi. Because my graph is not stretched at all, right? Stretched by nothing, so it still stays 2 pi. We agree? What happens if I have y equals sine 2x? Some people will say, well, now it's 4 pi, because it's stretched horizontally by a factor of 2. Is it really stretched by 2? What do we always do with our horizontal stretch? We flip it, correct? So it's a 2 in front, so it's a horizontal stretch by a factor of a half. So my graph is going to repeat itself faster, right? Because it's going to narrow the period. So you can either say, hey, the period is 2 pi, and I'm going to times it by a half. So it's going to repeat itself every pi. Or we can just go ahead and use the formula. The formula is period equals 2 pi divided by the b value. And the b value is right here, right? I wrote the equation here. My b value is what's between my x and my sine. So if I go 2 pi divided by 2, it's pi. Now, why do I get the same answer if I just multiply by the horizontal stretch or I divide by b? Because when I multiply by the horizontal stretch, I'm multiplying by a half. We agree? If I'm dividing by 2, I have to flip it and multiply by a half. So it's the same thing. I would just plug it into the formula if it were me. But that's why it narrows when b is 2, and it widens when b is a half, because you're actually stretching it by 2 if b is a half, and you're stretching it by a half if b is 2, right? Because the horizontal stretch flips. Okay. One thing I want you to write, b does not equal p. Does anyone here have a b name or a p name? I had a Paula in my class, and I was like, if B and P are the same, then Paula is Bala. So I just called her Bala after that. Because I was like, you switch them, you're a Bala. You're not a Paula. You're telling me B and P are the same. B and P are not the same. So what some people will do is they'll look at the equation, and they'll say, oh, B is 2. The period is 2. Are B and P the same? No, Paula did not like being called Bala. Beatrice and Beatrice are totally different. You know? So if you believe that P and B are the same, then like Paula and Bala are the same thing. They're not. Not at all. So please don't go to your equation, pick the B off, and say that's the period. It is not. B and period, not the same thing. Okay? So when the test comes and you do that, I am going to remind you that that is not cool. So don't do that. Be right, not wrong. Okay? So we need to state the period and the amplitude of these equations. What's the amplitude of the first one? It's 2. It's the absolute value of 2. It's 2. The basic sine x graph we had before was like this. Y equals sine x. We agree? So what was my A? 1. What was my B? 1. So amplitude was 1, and then my B and P are not the same, so I do 2 pi divided by 1, so it stayed 2 pi, right? Okay, what's my period? In radians and degrees. So in radians, it's 2 pi over, what's my B value? 3. If you forget what your B value is, it's the one between sine and theta. If you forget what your B value is, use your formula sheet, and on the very bottom right, it tells you which one is B, between the sine and the theta. See, look right here. Sine and x, B. Okay? Formula sheet should be your best friend. Okay? If they wanted it in degrees, we would do P equals 360 degrees divided by 3, so it'd be 120 degrees. Which makes sense, because 2 pi over 3 is the radian measure of 120 degrees, and 120 degrees is the same measure as 2 pi over 3 radians, right? They're just, you can change them up. So what's the amplitude of this one? It's the absolute value of a half. So it's still a half. So that means normally it'd be 1 up and 1 down. Now it's only a half up and a half down, right? So it's vertically squished. Not stretched, but we still stay stretched. And then the period is 2 pi divided by a half, which whenever we have a fraction, in a fraction, we write them sideways. Okay? Very important. Throughout the year, whenever you have a fraction embedded in a fraction, you're going to write it side by side. So 2 pi divided by a half is 2 pi times 2 over 1, which is 4 pi. This graph is now taking 4 pi or 720 degrees to repeat itself, correct? So it's taking longer. It's because it's being stretched horizontally by a factor of 2, because it always flips, right? Doesn't matter what unit we're in. So it became wider, twice as wide, before it repeats itself. You can state the transformations first if you really want to, because you do know them. This one would be a vertical stretch. We're not going hugely into them, though. We can just write it because we know it. Tomorrow we're going much more into it. Vertical stretch by a factor of about the x-axis. Oh, and we decided to move this to 9, right? Okay, what's my amplitude? What's in front of here? 2. What if it was a negative 2? What would my amplitude be? 2. Doesn't change. So my amplitude is 2. Okay, which of the following has changed? Well, my amplitude, because it was 1, right? The domain is XER. It just keeps going. So does that change it? Make my domain change? What does this affect? Vertical stretches affect my y's, correct? So my amplitude's going to change because my amplitude is my max and my mins, which is y's. Is my range going to change? Is my range y's? Yes, so this is going to change. The period is how long it takes to repeat itself xy's. Is that going to change? No, what's the period changes only when what? When I actually have this b be something else, right? The period was 2 pi. It's still going to be 2 pi because I'm going to divide by 1. My domain doesn't change because it's x's. Okay? So we're going to go over the range and how you can find it quickly. So the range is y such that my minimum is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to my maximum, yer. This is true every single time, min to max, and L shapes. So these both look like L's. Okay? I always say loser, loser. L's, L's. Okay? Slanted L's. Please don't make it a true L. That's an angle. Okay. So I need to find out what the heck the min and the max are. We agree? Now, some people will say, I'll just type into my calculator and I'll find the max and the min. Really easy if there's just numbers, like this one has, right? If it doesn't have numbers, if it has letters, you can use another way. So, you don't know this for sure yet, but there's something called the midline. And this graph actually has a midline at 0. The D value at the back is the vertical line that cuts the, or the horizontal line that cuts the graph in half. So I have a midline at 0. This is the line that would cut my graph in half, like vertically. Okay? My amplitude is the distance up from that and down from that. We agree because it's half the distance. So if I counted up to, I would get to a maximum of what? 2. And if I counted down to, I would get a minimum of -2 because this was at 0. We agree? If I changed this to 1, say there was a 1 at the back instead of a 0 now, say the midline was 1, I would draw my little 1, and then I would go up 2, so I would max out at 3, and I'd go down 2, and I would min out at -1. Okay? So it really does depend on where that middle line is, that median line, the midline, because I count up from it and down from it, my amplitude. Okay? So the minimum of this graph is -2. Is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 2. Yer. Does that make sense? So I want you guys, I don't care about what changed. I want you to give me the amplitude, the range, and the period. The domain is XER. Every single time unless I restrict it. So I want those 3. And then I want you to give me the maxes and mins. What transformation do we have happening? This 3, what is that? It's between the sign and the x, so it's with the x, so it's a what stretch? Horizontal stretch. By a factor of? How much? 1/3, always flips. About the opposite axis, so about the y-axis. So what's my amplitude? The absolute value of A, which is 1. So this graph goes up 1 and down 1. So actually the distance from min to max is how much? What's the distance from my min to my max? 2. Because amplitude is half the distance up and half the distance down, right? So if it's 1 up and 1 down, that's a distance of 2 between it from min to max, okay? The period of this one, we'll do it in radians. 2 pi divided by what? My b value, which is b equals 3. It's what's between these. So it's 2 pi over 3, or 360 degrees divided by 3, which is 120 degrees. My range, I need my min and my max, so I'm going to sketch it. Where's my midline at? What's my d value? The number at the back. I don't have a d value, it's a plus 0. So I draw a horizontal line at 0. So my midline is at y equals 0. And what's my amplitude up and amplitude down? 1. So I go up 1. So I max out at 1. And then I go down 1 from 0, and I min out at -1. So my range is y such that -1 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1 y-er. If you just memorize that without actually knowing what the heck you're doing, you will screw it up. I get the symbols going the wrong way. I get the minimums at this side and the maximums at that side because you're just trying to memorize it and not understand it. So then you just randomly throw things in and hope you're right. Never a good situation. So we're going from min to max, and then you're always reading from the y. So this one is y is greater because it's open to it. Greater than or equal to -1. Y is less than or equal to 1. We need to understand, right? Y. Okay, we're going to flip over. Instead of number of cycles, don't really care about this. I want range. So I want the amplitude, I want the period in degrees and radians, and I want the range. All of these happen to have midlines at 0. And people freak out. They're like, I don't know if it's with the x. If they don't have brackets around it, if it makes you feel better, throw some brackets around it. It's with the x. Okay? So I want these 3 answered. So the amplitude equals the absolute value of 3. So it's 3. The amplitude is distance from the mid to the max. So this one starts at 0. And it goes up 3. So it's a max at 3. Down 3. So it's a min at -3. Is it always just going to be up from 0 and down from 0? No. Tomorrow, new ball game. But today, yes. Up from 0, down from 0. So enjoy it. Okay. So y such that -3 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 3 y-er. The period is 2 pi divided by b, which is 2. So this one happens in pi. So wait, it's half the time. It was in 2 pi, it's now in pi. How is that possible? It's horizontally stretched by what? 1/2. So it's going to be half the period, which makes sense. So you know you're right. You can check it. So p equals 360 divided by 2. So it's 180 degrees. So it's half the time it's going to repeat itself, which makes sense because I horizontally stretched it by 1/2 of what it was originally. Okay? This one has an amplitude of 2. And then this one goes up 2 from 0. Down 2, so it's at -2. So it's going to be y such that -2 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 2 y-er. So the period is going to be 2 pi divided by 3, which means makes sense because it's a third of what it was. It's horizontally stretched by a third. And then the period is 360 divided by 3, which is 120 degrees, which is a third of what it was because it's horizontally stretched by a third, right? This one, my amplitude is 3. Your amplitude is never negative. It's a distance, right? So it can't be -3. Don't pick that answer. If it says, let's determine the amplitude on your diploma, and one of them is negative, you just cross it off because it can't be. Easy. This one goes up 3, down 3. So it's going to be -3 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 3 y-er. It's not always going to just go up this. It does because I have zeros at the end, my midlines. The period is 2 pi divided by 1/2, which I would never write like this. When I have part of when my fraction is fractions, I write it sideways because that's just ridiculous. 2 pi times 2, so 4 pi. It's double what it was. Yes, because it's horizontally stretched by a factor of 2, so it's twice as long until it repeats itself. And then 360 divided, or times 2, divided by 1/2, times 2, 720 degrees. This one has an amplitude of 1/2, so it's half as high. So I go up 1/2 and down 1/2. So I'm going to be from 0, because I have midline of 0. So I'm going to have -1/2 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1/2 y-er. And then the period is 2 pi divided by a quarter. So it's going to be 8 pi. And then the period is 360 degrees divided by a quarter, which is 1440. Your homework for now is this. Page 233. If it says sketch a graph, don't worry about that for now. We're going to deal with sketching later. So I just want you to answer everything but the sketching. So like I said, if it says sketch, don't worry about the sketching part. We're dealing with that